Okay, students, the next aspect of PEST that we're going to look into is the political and legal considerations when businesses operate in global markets. So first up, political, there's only two dot points to deal with, which is the stability of foreign governments and the relationship of the Australian government with foreign governments. So political considerations in general could involve the absence or presence of legislation related to countries around the world, or the presence of free trade agreements and things like that. It could involve other factors like how changes in leadership might affect the relationship. But in terms of the stability of overseas governments, a lot of the key facts include bribery and corruption overseas, war, or quite simply whether or not the two countries get on. As we know, Australia has a range of differences with many countries around the world. Most recently, there's been some issues with China over tariffs and the political relationship. However, those have since been removed. And what we will do with Donald Trump and his 10% tariff on all Australian exports is something else that may have to be considered in the future. So the stability of foreign governments basically means that if a country has a lack of stability, this will affect a business's operations in that country. If it is unstable, it may be protests, it may be civil disorder, which may be riots, it could be corruption. And this may hinder or complicate business operations. And the opposite is also true, that if there is the presence of a stable government with free trade agreements, this may encourage further investment in the country and further expansion. So you should hopefully know that there are many countries around the world which are going through some tough times, be it Myanmar, which on top of its very undemocratic military junta regime has just been through a horrible earthquake, be it the war in the Ukraine, be it places like Venezuela or even some parts of Indonesia. Hopefully, if this ever comes up in a case study, you would be made aware of the unstable elements of the country at hand. So really, the solution is you've got to do your research. So a business should look into the type of government and what actually is going on in the country before it expands or continually is open to understanding. A lot of that can come through Austrade. They can give you a lot of information on operating overseas for free. But in general, you've just got to be aware of the operations of politics in the country and how it may impact on you, not only on your sales, but also on the business public image, because if you are caught offering bribes and or involved in corruption and that comes out, clearly that's not a good look. So the relationship with the Australian government and foreign governments, again, is similar, but this hopefully is more positive. So I think the Australian government has a fairly sound relationship with most countries overseas that it wants to, and I think our government works hard to establish those relationships and to build on them, because we know as a country that exports lots, it's only going to be beneficial to us to act in the interests of our businesses to further, the markets that we potentially might get for our products. So if there is free trade agreements, which Australia holds many, this is a positive thing for business because not only is the free trade agreement in place, generally it means that there's a network of other connections within the relationship that businesses can play on. However, if there are disagreements and restrictions on trade, the two latest examples being Donald Trump's 10% tariff, but before that, the range of Chinese tariffs during the Morrison government, which were imposed on a range of Australian exports, coal, seafood, wine, barley, had a significant impact on exporters in those sectors. And that caused a real strain on the relationship between the two governments and also clearly on the businesses involved in those export industries. Legal. So the wording of the syllabus point is somewhat confusing because you can see there, so the impact of legal systems on business operations, differences regarding competition regulation. So Competition regulation might be or could be a different legal category altogether, but I've never seen anything about competition regulation asked as a question. The legal considerations have only ever been asked in relation to patent registrations and product liability. For example, why do businesses need to be aware of this? Well, when operating outside of Australia, the range of legal considerations on you as a business are going to vary significantly between countries. That could be competition regulation because there may be the presence of an organisation like the ACCC. There may not. Patent registration, we know that patents do not go overseas unless you are part of the Patent Cooperation Treaty. So you will need to register your patent in the countries that you operate in. And liability is carried across borders. However, liability laws and protections and fines and sanctions may be significantly different, which may have an impact on you, the product, the distribution of the product, the marketing that you include with the product. There's a range of factors which could be impacted by the differences in liability laws. So patents give a business an exclusive right to manufacture and sell a device, substance, method, or process. Great. When businesses expand globally, generally you would have to register the patent in each country that you operate in to protect the intellectual property of that patent and you as the business owner. However, there is an organisation called WIPO, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization, which coordinates, I guess, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, which, as it says there, is 148 participating countries around the world. So if you apply through through WIPO to get onto the PCT, then that should protect your intellectual property in those countries. Now, clearly, there's 190 something countries in the world. There are still some which are not signed up to the PCT, which means potentially your IP is still at risk. However, if you do nothing when trading overseas, then clearly you're at greater risk for someone to steal potentially not only your IP but also your trademark, business name, and other things. However, the syllabus does focus only on patents, so you're not necessarily going to get any marks for speaking about the Madrid Protocol or other trademark-related instruments. So, product liability means that the legal liability for every product which is exported and sold overseas travels with that product, and that the product itself should meet the specifications and not cause fault or harm to the people or the person or people who have purchased that product. So when a business is operating globally, they need to abide by the laws of product liability in that country, which may be different, and the sums for loss, damage, or injury at the court in that country may be significantly larger or smaller than they would be in Australia. So if a business chooses not to research and do the right thing in terms of product liability, there's a range of issues that could occur to the business in relation to fines. There could be boycotts of particular products, really, it's the business public image which is going to be most significantly impacted if businesses aren't aware and don't do the right thing in relation to liability globally. Okay, so I think I've got two practice questions here. So a pretty easy one, the stability of foreign governments here. And let's just look at the answer. So it's an explain question. And the key thing here is that the company is planning global expansion. So if you simply regurgitated and defined your knowledge of what stability of foreign governments is, that's great, but I don't think you would get 3 marks unless you specifically made a point or a couple of points about how understanding the stability of foreign governments would aid a business in its global expansion. So this is pretty much straight out of the marking key, which you can have a look at and adapt and adopt as you see fit. Okay, so again, this was in the 2024 exam, and here we've got another example of where the examiner has included a short little case study or a short piece of prompt or text about Lisa, who owns some clothing boutiques and is thinking of opening up an overseas branch. So again, we're thinking about expansion. So the question asks you to advise, which is probably one of the first times that this has come up. Well, certainly in the 2024 paper, it doesn't come up very often. So just make note of that verb because advise does mean that you need to absolutely recommend or inform. So you've got to phrase your answer with that as a focus. So almost you are telling Lisa what to do. And in this case, you are telling her what to do in relation to registering her patents to stop her her clothing, be it unique as it may, from being stolen overseas. So even though it is advised, it's still worthwhile to start with the definition of what a patent is, and then you are going to need to advise Lisa to register those patents either individually in the country she operates or to sign up to the PCT, which again gives coverage through 148 countries. Again, without relating it back to Lisa and actually telling her in the wording of your answer what to do, you may not get 3 marks if you simply just regurgitate your factual knowledge. It's got to be framed in the right context. So that was political and legal factors. I hope it was worthwhile. Thanks.